117,000 unaccompanied children will arrive in the U.S. by their projection this year. Will he learn about it today? And that number seems like a crisis. The Secretary said it isn't. How would we define a crisis?
Well, I'll leave that to the Secretary of Homeland Security to define. He said it was a challenge. It is a challenge.
And now, okay, so they don't want to call it a crisis. It's a challenge. Those are still not good things when they are caused by your bad policies. You didn't have to have this challenge if you didn't buy into the political rhetoric of the far left and then put their policies in place. You didn't have to have this crisis challenge, whatever you want to call it. And then now they're overwhelmed. Now they're seeking volunteers to help. But this is very much an example of taking the executive actions that were taken by Joe Biden immediately and the consequences they are having on our Border Patrol agents and on, of course, our border states.
Well, Jordan, first of all, it turns out that enforcement actually makes a huge difference. Who could have possibly known that enforcement actually helps rather than hurts the problem? But second, I mean, I would follow up on the conversation you had about Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He wants to call it overwhelming. He wants to call it a challenge. Maybe he doesn't want to call it a crisis. But, Jordan, people need to consider the source. This is a guy who is one of the biggest proponents of open borders that's out there. So if he is conceding, Jordan, that it's overwhelming or it's a challenge, you have a full-blown crisis on your hands. But I would say this, the message from the White House, the message out of Jen Psaki is that they need to do a better job of communicating that now is not the right time to come. Jordan, there's a very clear way that the executive branch communicates not to come. It's by enforcing. It's by sending the message that if you do come illegally, you're not going to be released into the interior of the country. You're actually going to be apprehended and you're going to be turned around. Jordan, that kind of enforcement is what quells a crisis, and we're not guessing about it. This is what happened a couple of years ago. The Trump administration made it very clear that they would enforce the laws, and that quelled the crisis. So again, Secretary Mayorkas can call it overwhelming if he wants, but it's a crisis, and it's a crisis, Jordan, that he could quell if he wanted to.
When you get to numbers of 6,000, the traffickers get right through. The drugs are getting through. The terrorist groups also utilize the southern border. Some, it's not necessarily to carry out attacks on the U.S., but it's to make money, to sell drugs, trafficking of people, trafficking of goods, trafficking of minors, sex traffickers, etc. All of that becomes easier when there's a mess.
Yes.
It's a lot harder when there's only 800 people doing it instead of 6,000 plus.
And these are the ones they know about. These are not the ones who slip through that they don't see and don't get to confront. Yeah, this is a crisis of their own making. It's a moral crisis for the reasons you just indicated, because of human trafficking of young girls and sometimes boys being taken advantage of by sexual traffickers. So it's a moral crisis. It's also a health crisis because now they are releasing into the interior of the United States people who test positive at the border. They test positive and they still get on a bus and they go into the interior. That's happening right now too. So it's a moral crisis. It's a health crisis. And as you indicated, it's a national security crisis because we don't know who all is coming across the border.
No.
It's a crisis of their own making. You know, there's a reason that a lot of people are showing up at the border with T-shirts that say, Mr. Biden, please let us in.
Yeah.
Because this is something that he instigated. As Tom Cotton said in one of our breaks there, this is not catch and release. This is recruit and release. One of the first things Biden did on his first day in office, he issued an executive order. There would be a 100-day pause on any deportations. That was like sending an engraved invitation to people to come and to illegally cross the border to America.